A 4-year-old girl walked up to Maya's cafe counter and signed 2 words that should have been impossible: "Your mom." The child had never met her before, had no reason to know her. But those gray eyes, so heartbreakingly familiar, stared up at Maya like they'd been searching for her across lifetimes. And then the door opened. Adrian Castillon, the billionaire who destroyed Maya 5 years ago, stood frozen in the doorway. His face went white. His daughter stood between them, small hands still forming signs Maya couldn't breathe to answer. Because Maya had lost a baby 5 years ago. Lost it alone, in a hospital, 2 days after Adrian married another woman. She'd bled out her future on a bathroom floor while he said vows to someone else. This child was 4 years old. And as Adrian's eyes moved from his daughter to Maya, one impossible question hung in the air like smoke. What if Maya hadn't lost their baby at all? What if someone had taken her? The little girl signed again, desperate now. "Why does mommy hate you? Why do you have daddy's sad eyes?" Victoria Castillon, Adrian's wife, appeared behind them, designer heels clicking like a countdown. Her smile was poison. Her voice was ice. Well, well. The ghost returns. 5 years of silence. 5 years of buried secrets. And in 30 seconds, everything was about to detonate. Welcome to Mr. Harrington's Stories, where love, betrayal, and billion-dollar secrets collide. Before we dive into what really happened 5 years ago, before we uncover the truth about that hospital, that marriage, and that impossible little girl, I want to speak a blessing over your life. May this week bring you unexpected reconciliation, hidden truths coming to light, and the courage to face what you thought was lost forever. If you're here with me right now, type "present" in the comments. Let me see who's ready for this emotional journey. Because what you're about to hear, this story of stolen children and stolen years, it needs witnesses who believe that some truths refuse to stay buried. Now, if you believe that people deserve second chances, that love shouldn't be silenced by wealth and power, hit that subscribe button. Because the trolls who think money can erase the past, they won't. Let's prove them wrong together. Maya's world narrowed to the small hands still forming shapes in the air. The cafe sounds, the hiss of the espresso machine, the murmur of afternoon conversations, the clink of ceramic against wood, all faded into white noise. Her heart slammed against her ribcage, so hard she thought everyone in the room must hear it. The little girl's hands moved again, slower this time, as if she knew the weight of what she was asking. "You feel like home. Why do you feel like home?" Maya's hands trembled as she signed back, her fingers barely steady enough to form the words. "What's your name, sweetheart?" The child's face lit up with that pure, unfiltered joy that only children possess, the kind that comes before the world teaches them to guard their hearts. "Emma. Daddy says I'm special because I see things others don't." Emma. The name hit Maya like a physical blow. She'd had a name picked out once, whispered to herself in the dark hours of a hospital room she'd checked herself out of too soon. She'd never spoken it aloud. Never let herself imagine a future where that name would belong to a living, breathing child with gray eyes and questions that cut straight to the soul. Before Maya could respond, a voice sliced through the moment like a blade. "Emma. Get away from the help." Victoria Ashford Castillon moved through the cafe like a predator in Louboutins, each step deliberate, each movement calculated for maximum effect. She wore her wealth like armor, a cream Chanel suit that probably cost more than Maya's monthly rent, diamonds glinting at her throat and wrists, her blonde hair swept into a perfect chignon that hadn't shifted despite the October wind outside. Maya's eyes locked with Victoria's across the counter. For one suspended moment, she saw it all flash across the other woman's face: recognition, shock, and then something far more dangerous: cold, precise calculation. Victoria's expression smoothed into practiced neutrality, so quickly Maya almost wondered if she'd imagined that flicker of panic. Almost. Victoria closed the distance between them, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor like a countdown timer. She studied Maya with the kind of vicious precision usually reserved for enemies on a battlefield, her blue eyes cataloging every detail: the flower on Maya's apron, the simple gold studs in her ears, the hands that had once sketched designs for luxury hotels now stained with coffee and pastry cream. Well, well. The ghost returns. Victoria's smile was all teeth, no warmth. "I thought you'd learned your lesson 5 years ago." Maya forced her voice to remain steady, even as her pulse hammered in her throat. She'd spent 5 years learning how to hide her fear, how to stand her ground when every instinct screamed at her to run. "I'm just working, Victoria. I don't want any trouble." Victoria leaned across the counter, close enough that Maya could smell her perfume, something expensive and cold, like winter roses preserved in ice. Her voice dropped to a whisper meant only for Maya's ears. Too late. You should have stayed gone. Adrian's been unstable lately. Asking questions. If he sees you. If I see who, Victoria? The air in the cafe changed. Maya felt it before she saw him, that shift in atmospheric pressure that Adrian had always carried with him, the way a room rearranged itself around his presence. Victoria's spine went rigid. Maya couldn't breathe. Couldn't move. Couldn't do anything but watch as Adrian Castillon stepped fully into the cafe, his gray eyes scanning the space with a kind of intensity that had once been reserved for her alone. And then those eyes found hers. Recognition hit him like a freight train. Maya watched it happen in slow motion, the way his face went from casual curiosity to complete devastation in the space of a heartbeat. His lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came out. His hand reached for the counter to steady himself, knuckles going white against the dark wood. Maya. Her name on his lips after 5 years of silence was a gunshot in a library. Everything in Maya wanted to run, to bolt through the back door of the cafe and disappear into the Boston afternoon, to protect the fragile peace she'd built from the hurricane of this man's presence. But Emma's small hand had found hers again, tiny fingers wrapping around Maya's palm with a trust that felt both devastating and sacred. Adrian took a step forward, and suddenly Maya was drowning in memories she'd worked so hard to bury. His hands threading through her hair in his penthouse apartment, rain against the windows. His voice in the darkness promising her forever, promising her everything, promising he'd burn his family's empire to the ground before he'd give her up. The way he'd looked at her the night before his engagement to Victoria was announced, like she was his last breath, his salvation, his destruction all wrapped into one. Present tense crashed back in as Victoria positioned herself between them, her body language screaming ownership, control, territory marked and defended. Darling, this is just the cafe, girl. We need to go. Your father's waiting at the estate. But Emma had already pulled away from Victoria's reaching hand, returning to Maya's side, tugging at her apron with desperate urgency. Her small hands flew through signs, faster now, almost frantic. Please don't leave. You're the first person who talks to me like I'm real. Maya's eyes filled with tears before she could stop them. She crouched down to Emma's level, her hands moving with the kind of gentle certainty she hadn't felt in years. You are so real, sweetheart. So incredibly real. Adrian watched this exchange, and Maya saw something breaking and reforming in his expression. She knew that look, had seen it once before, the night he told her about his mother, about the childhood that had taught him to lock away softness like it was a liability. This was Adrian stripped of pretense, of the armor his family name required. This was the man she'd loved watching his daughter connect with a stranger in a way she'd never connected with her own mother. He ignored Victoria entirely, his voice rough with emotion. Maya, we need to talk. Please. Maya shook her head, even as her heart screamed at her to say yes, to give him the chance he was asking for, to believe that 5 years could be bridged with conversation. There's nothing to say. You made your choice 5 years ago. Something cracked in Adrian's expression, raw and unguarded. I didn't know you left Boston. I looked for you. For months, Victoria's voice cut through like shattering glass. Enough. Emma, car. Now. But Emma didn't move. Her small body pressed closer to Maya, her hand gripping Maya's fingers with surprising strength. Victoria's carefully constructed mask began to slip, fury bleeding through the cracks. I said now. Emma flinched, a full-body recoil that spoke of learned fear, of consequences delivered behind closed doors. Maya's response was pure instinct. She stepped between Victoria and the little girl, her body a shield, her eyes meeting Victoria's with a challenge that surprised even herself. The cafe had gone completely silent. Other patrons watched with the kind of riveted attention usually reserved for car crashes and public proposals. The barista had frozen mid-pour. Even the background music seemed to have quieted, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Adrian's eyes narrowed at Victoria, his voice dropping to a register Maya had only heard once before, the night he'd confronted a business partner who tried to undermine her career. Don't ever speak to her like that again. Victoria's smile was poisonous, calculated, designed to wound. Are we really doing this? Here? In front of your daughter? Emma looked up at Adrian then, her small face tilted in confusion, in curiosity, in that uncanny perception children sometimes possess, the ability to see the truth adults spend lifetimes trying to hide. Her hands moved slowly, forming signs that made Adrian's blood visibly drain from his face. "Daddy, why does Mommy hate the pretty lady? Why does the pretty lady have your sad eyes?" The question hung in the air like smoke, like prophecy, like the beginning of an unraveling that had been 5 years in the making. Adrian stared at his daughter, then at Maya, then back at Emma, and Maya watched the moment his world tilted on its axis. Watched the moment he started asking himself the same questions Emma had voiced. Watched the moment he looked at his 4-year-old daughter and saw Maya's expressions reflected back at him in ways that should have been impossible. Victoria's face had gone pale beneath her makeup, her composure fracturing at the edges. And Maya stood frozen in her café, her sanctuary, her carefully constructed new life, with a little girl's hand in hers and a truth she didn't yet understand pressing against her chest like a living thing trying to break free. What would you do if you were Maya right now? Run again, or finally face the man who broke your heart? Drop your answer below. The Castillon estate sat on 12 acres of manicured perfection in Dover, Massachusetts, where old money went to forget it had ever been new. Adrian's private study occupied the entire west wing of the main house, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking gardens that cost more to maintain than most people earned in a year, leather-bound books that had never been read lining mahogany shelves, and a desk that had belonged to his grandfather, then his father, now him. Legacy pressed down on every surface like dust. He sat in darkness, the only light coming from the desk lamp casting long shadows across his face. His hands shook as he held the thick folder the private investigator had delivered an hour ago. He'd paid extra for speed, for discretion, for answers to questions he'd been too afraid to ask for 5 years. The words on the page blurred and refocused as he read them again, his voice barely a whisper in the empty room. Subject relocated to Portland, Oregon, November 2019. Hospitalized December 28, 2019. Diagnosis: miscarriage, severe hemorrhaging. No listed emergency contact. Patient discharged herself AMA after 36 hours. Adrian's hands shook harder. The dates aligned with brutal precision. Maya would have been 8 weeks pregnant when he stood at an altar and promised forever to another woman. She would have been carrying their child while he smiled for photographers and cut a 5-tier cake he couldn't taste. She would have been alone, bleeding, losing their future while he consummated a marriage built on lies and family expectations. His phone buzzed against the desk. Victoria's name lit up the screen with a text message that made his jaw clench. "She's a liar and a manipulator. Don't let her destroy what we've built." Another buzz. His father this time. "Handle this quietly. The Ashford merger depends on your marriage remaining intact." Adrian stared at the messages, at the casual way they discussed a human being like she was a problem to be managed, a threat to be neutralized. Maya had never asked him for anything except his honesty. She'd loved him when he was nobody's heir, just a man trying to figure out if he could be more than the sum of his family's expectations. And he'd repaid that love by choosing the path of least resistance, by letting her disappear into the night while he played the dutiful son. He picked up his phone and hurled it across the room. It shattered against the fireplace with a satisfying crack, pieces scattering across Persian rugs worth more than Maya's entire café. In her small apartment above the café, Maya sat on the edge of her bed, trembling, holding a shoebox she'd kept hidden in the back of her closet for 5 years. The cardboard was soft with age and handling, the corners worn from all the times she'd taken it out and put it back, unable to look but unable to throw away. Janelle sat beside her, Maya's best friend and co-owner of the café, the woman who'd helped her put the pieces back together when she'd arrived in Boston 2 years ago with nothing but a resume full of gaps and eyes that had forgotten how to hope. "Girl, you have to tell him. He deserves to know what happened." Maya's hands shook as she opened the box. Inside, ultrasound photos she could never throw away, the grainy black and white images of a future that had died before it could begin. Hospital discharge papers marked AMA, against medical advice, because she couldn't afford another day, couldn't bear another hour of nurses asking where the father was, if anyone was coming to help her, if she had somewhere safe to go. A single pressed flower from the bouquet Adrian had once given her, dried petals brittle with age but still holding their shape, still proof that once upon a time, someone had loved her enough to bring beauty into her world. He chose Victoria. He chose his empire. What difference does it make now? Janelle took Maya's hand, her grip firm and grounding. That little girl signed Mom to you, Maya. You felt it too. Something's not right about this whole situation. Maya's voice broke as she admitted what she'd been too afraid to say out loud, what had been clawing at her chest since the moment Emma's small hands formed that impossible question. What if Emma is? What if there's a reason she feels familiar? What if? Her phone rang, cutting through the confession before it could fully form. Unknown number. Maya stared at it, her heart hammering against her ribs. She knew before she answered. Somehow she knew. Please don't hang up. Adrian's voice after 5 years sounded different, rougher, weighted with something that might have been regret or might have been the beginning of understanding. I know about the baby. I know what I did to you. And I need to know why Emma looked at you like she'd been searching for you her entire life. The private garden at the Castellón Hotel had been their place once. Hidden behind century-old hedges, accessible only through a key card Adrian had given her with shaking hands, promising her this space would always be theirs, their sanctuary from a world that wanted to keep them apart. Maya stood at the entrance at midnight, the October air cold enough to see her breath, wondering why she'd agreed to this, why she hadn't learned that some doors should stay closed. Adrian was already there, pacing beneath the pergola where wisteria would bloom in spring. He turned when he heard her footsteps, and the way he looked at her, like she was oxygen and he'd been drowning, made her chest ache with the kind of pain that comes from remembering what it felt like to be loved completely. I saw the hospital records, Maya. December 2019. You were pregnant with our child, and I was standing at an altar marrying another woman. Maya's tears fell freely now, 5 years of holding them back finally breaking like a dam giving way to inevitable flood. I lost the baby 2 days after your wedding. Alone. In a city where no one knew my name. Adrian's devastation was complete. She watched it overtake him, the way his face crumpled, the way his hands reached for her then stopped, remembering he'd lost the right to comfort her, to touch her, to be anything more than the man who'd broken her so thoroughly she'd had to become someone else entirely just to survive. Why didn't you tell me? The question hung between them, and Maya felt 5 years of buried anger finally surface, finally allowed to exist in the space between what was and what should have been. You want to know why? Because Victoria called me the morning of your rehearsal dinner. She told me if I didn't disappear, she'd destroy not just me, but my mother, my younger brother, everyone I loved. She had the power, Adrian. Your family had the power. And I was just nobody. Adrian's voice broke on the words. You were everything. You are everything. Maya's laugh was bitter, sharp enough to cut. Then why did you marry her? The silence that followed was deafening. Adrian opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. What could he say? That his father had threatened to disown him? That the Ashford merger had been worth more than love? That he'd been a coward who'd chosen security over the woman who'd made him believe he could be more than his last name? In her pristine bedroom at the estate, Victoria sat propped against silk pillows, a glass of wine in her hand, looking at photos of Emma on her phone. Her daughter. The child she'd built an empire of lies to keep. The little girl who made her existence as Adrian's wife necessary, permanent, unbreakable. She'd given that child everything. A name that opened doors. A legacy that would carry her through generations. A future that poor girls like Maya could only dream about from the wrong side of privilege. Emma was hers. And no café girl with flour under her fingernails was going to take that from her. Victoria made a phone call, her voice smooth as poisoned honey. Yes, I need you to expedite the custody evaluation. I want full psychological assessments done on my husband. No, he's becoming unstable. Obsessed with a woman from his past. I need legal ammunition. She hung up, took another sip of wine, and smiled at Emma's photo. Some children were born. Others were acquired. But once they were yours, once the papers were signed and the money had changed hands, biology was just a detail. And details could be buried as easily as bodies. Back in the garden, Adrian's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, his backup phone, the one Victoria didn't know about, and stared at the screen. His face went completely white. I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. When you lost our baby, are you absolutely certain? Maya's confusion turned to hurt, sharp and immediate. What are you asking me? Adrian's hand shook as he pulled up files on his phone, medical records he had no legal right to access but had obtained anyway because when you had enough money, laws became suggestions. Emma's medical records. I accessed them tonight. Her blood type is O negative. Victoria is A positive. I'm O positive. It's genetically impossible. Maya's world tilted on its axis. The garden spun around her, the carefully manicured beauty blurring into watercolor smears of green and shadow. What are you saying? Adrian's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, as if speaking the words too loudly would make them less true, or more true, or somehow shatter whatever remained of the reality they thought they understood. I'm saying Emma isn't biologically Victoria's daughter. And I think Victoria knows I'm starting to figure that out. Maya's voice came out barely audible, fragile as spider silk. But if Emma isn't Victoria's, then whose child is she? Adrian's phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number with a single attachment. His hands shook so hard he almost dropped the phone as he opened it. A photo of a birth certificate, official and damning and impossible. Mother's name, redacted. Father's name, Adrian Michael Castillon. Date of birth, December 28, 2019. The exact date Maya had lost their baby. The exact date she'd bled alone in a Portland hospital and been told there was nothing left to save. Adrian's voice broke on a question that rewrote their entire history, that turned 5 years of grief into 5 years of theft, that made every impossible recognition suddenly, horrifyingly possible. Maya, what if you didn't lose our baby? What if Victoria took her? The words hung in the midnight air like a curse, like a revelation, like the beginning of an unraveling that would destroy empires and resurrect the dead. Maya stared at Adrian, her mind racing through impossibilities that were starting to look dangerously like truth. A little girl with Adrian's eyes and Maya's intuition. A child who'd signed mom to a stranger. A 4-year-old who saw things others didn't, who felt connections that shouldn't exist, who'd been searching without knowing what she was searching for. Emma. Their Emma. Stolen, hidden, raised by the woman who'd threatened to destroy everything Maya loved if she didn't disappear. Raised by the woman who was now preparing legal warfare to keep the truth buried forever. Do you think Emma is Maya and Adrian's biological daughter? Or is this another one of Victoria's twisted games? Tell me what you think is really going on. Dr. Sarah Chen's office existed in that peculiar space where wealth bought discretion. A private medical suite in downtown Boston where patient files never saw the light of public record and emergency consultations happened at 2 in the morning without questions asked. The examination room smelled of antiseptic and expensive leather, the kind of place where secrets were diagnosed and treated with the same clinical precision as any other ailment. Maya sat in a chair that probably cost more than her monthly rent, her hands gripping the armrests so hard her knuckles had gone white. Adrian stood beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body but careful not to touch, not to presume he still had that right. Dr. Chen sat across from them. Maya's medical records from 2019 spread across her desk like evidence at a crime scene. Dr. Chen's voice was measured professional, but Maya caught the edge of something else underneath. Anger maybe, or the kind of righteous fury that came from realizing medicine had been weaponized against someone vulnerable. Ms. Thornton, your discharge papers indicate you left AMA, against medical advice. The attending physician's notes state you were experiencing severe psychological distress and refused follow-up care. Maya's voice came out hollow, scraped raw from 5 years of trying to forget. I was alone. I couldn't afford to stay. I just wanted to forget. Dr. Chen's expression softened, but her next words were careful, chosen with the precision of someone delivering news that would change everything. Your ultrasound from the ER visit shows a viable pregnancy at 9 weeks. But there's no record of fetal remains or confirmation of complete miscarriage. Just severe bleeding and trauma. Adrian's hand found the back of Maya's chair, steadying himself. What does that mean? Dr. Chen looked between them, her gaze settling on Maya with something that looked like sympathy mixed with clinical certainty. It means Ms. Thornton may have been told she miscarried, but without proper follow-up, without confirmation. There's a medical possibility she was misdiagnosed. Or deliberately misinformed. Maya couldn't breathe. The room tilted and spun. 5 years of grief suddenly transforming into 5 years of theft, every tear she cried over a lost future suddenly recontextualizing into tears for a stolen child who'd been alive the entire time. Are you saying? Dr. Chen's voice was gentle but firm. I'm saying we need DNA testing. Immediately. The Castillon estate's formal dining room had hosted presidents and foreign dignitaries, witnessed merger negotiations worth billions and marriage proposals calculated down to the carat weight of the diamond. But it had never seen anything like the confrontation that unfolded the next morning, when Adrian walked in with a team of lawyers and a truth that would burn his family's carefully constructed world to the ground. His parents sat at one end of the long mahogany table, his father, Richard Castillon, 70 years old and still wielding power like a sword, his mother, Eleanor, elegant and cold as winter marble. Victoria occupied the other end, her father Senator Ashford beside her, both of them wearing the kind of calm that came from believing money and influence could smooth over any inconvenience. The family attorney, Gerald Morrison, sat between them like a referee at a match he didn't yet realize was already lost. Adrian's voice cut through the morning silence like steel. "Where did Emma come from, Victoria?" Victoria's composure cracked at the edges, her smile too tight, her hands gripping her coffee cup with trembling fingers. "She's our daughter. I gave birth." Adrian slammed a thick folder of medical records onto the table with enough force to make everyone jump. Papers scattered across polished wood, hospital records, employee testimonies, bank transfers highlighted in accusatory yellow. "You faked the entire pregnancy. I have testimonies from 3 staff members who never saw you show. I have your medical records showing you've been on birth control for 7 years straight. I have gynecological exams from 6 months before Emma was supposedly born confirming you've never carried a pregnancy to term." Senator Ashford's face went red, his politician's instinct for damage control kicking in immediately. "This is absurd. You're having some kind of breakdown." But Adrian wasn't finished. He pulled out Emma's birth certificate, holding it up like evidence at a trial. "Emma's birth certificate lists me as the father, but the mother's name is redacted. That's not standard procedure. That's a sealed private adoption. So I'll ask one more time, where did you get my daughter?" The room held its breath. Maya stood in the doorway. Adrian had insisted she be here, had insisted she witness the moment the truth finally detonated, and watched Victoria's carefully constructed mask finally shatter. Victoria's voice rose to a scream, all pretense of control evaporating in the face of exposure. "I saved her. That girl in the hospital, she was nobody. She would have raised Emma in poverty, in obscurity. I gave Emma a life." The silence that followed was absolute. Richard Castillon's face had gone ashen. Eleanor's hand covered her mouth. Senator Ashford stared at his daughter like he was seeing her for the first time and didn't recognize what he saw. Adrian's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, and somehow that was more terrifying than any shout could have been. "What girl in what hospital, Victoria?" The investigator Adrian had hired, a former FBI agent named Marcus Rodriguez who specialized in cases wealthy people wanted to pretend didn't exist, stepped forward with a tablet. Security footage began to play on the large screen that normally displayed quarterly earnings reports and merger proposals. December 2019. Portland Hospital. Grainy surveillance footage showed Victoria in the hallway outside the maternity ward, her face partially obscured by sunglasses and a scarf but unmistakable to anyone who knew her. Timestamps placed her there for 3 consecutive days, always in the early morning hours, always watching, always waiting. The footage shifted. Maya being wheeled into an examination room, her face contorted in pain and fear, so young, so alone. Victoria following at a distance, speaking to a man in a white coat whose name badge identified him as Dr. Marcus Webb, hospital administrator. Rodriguez's voice was clinical, detached, delivering facts like bullets. Victoria Ashford Castillon had been following Maya Thornton for 6 weeks prior to this footage. When Ms. Thornton went to the ER hemorrhaging and in distress, Mrs. Castillon saw an opportunity. She bribed Dr. Marcus Webb, $1.2 million, transferred to an offshore account we've since traced, to facilitate what can only be described as medical kidnapping. The footage continued. Maya sedated, unconscious, her body small and fragile on the hospital bed. Medical staff moving with urgent precision. And then footage from the NICU, a premature infant tiny and fighting, being transferred not to Maya's room but to a private suite where Victoria waited. Rodriguez continued his devastating recitation of facts. Ms. Thornton was induced into early labor while sedated. The baby, Emma, was born premature but viable at 32 weeks. She was immediately transferred to a private NICU under Mrs. Castillon's care. Fake medical records were created indicating fetal death. Ms. Thornton was told her baby didn't survive. Bank transfers flashed across the screen. $2 million to Webb. $500,000 to a nurse who'd since died in a convenient car accident. $3 million to a lawyer who'd expedited a fraudulent adoption using Senator Ashford's political connections to seal all records. Maya's legs gave out. She sank against the doorframe, her vision blurring with tears, her body shaking with a rage so profound it felt like it would tear her apart from the inside. 5 years. 5 years of grieving a child who'd been alive, who'd been stolen, who'd been raised by the woman who'd threatened to destroy everything Maya loved. Victoria lunged from her chair, desperation replacing calculation in her eyes. She had nothing. No money, no family, no future. Emma would have grown up in poverty, Adrian's voice cut through like a blade. Emma would have grown up loved. By her real mother. The woman you threatened. The woman you erased. The woman whose child you stole. Richard Castillon stood, his face a mask of fury and something that might have been shame. Get her out of my house. Victoria's father reached for her, but she jerked away, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. You're all going to regret this. I have lawyers, I have connections, I have. Rodriguez pulled out a final document, an arrest warrant signed by a federal judge. You have the right to remain silent. Maya's Café had become a sanctuary again, but different this time. The afternoon sun streamed through windows she'd scrubbed herself, illuminating the corner table where Emma sat with crayons and paper, her small hands creating worlds in primary colors while legal proceedings ground forward and DNA tests confirmed what their hearts had already known. Emma looked up as Maya approached, her gray eyes, Adrian's eyes, Maya's intuition, bright with the kind of trust children give so freely when they finally feel safe. Her hands moved in careful signs. Are you my real mom? Maya sank into the chair beside her, tears streaming down her face, 5 years of grief and rage and impossible hope finally finding release. I think I might be, sweetheart. And I've been looking for you my whole life without even knowing it. Emma's response was immediate, certain, spoken in the language of hands that had always known what words couldn't say. I knew. My heart knew. Adrian stood in the doorway watching them, his own tears falling unchecked. He'd lost 5 years to his own cowardice, to his family's expectations, to a world that valued legacy over love. But Emma was alive. Maya was here. And somehow, impossibly, they'd been given a second chance that most people only dreamed about. He approached slowly, carefully, still learning how to exist in this new reality where everything he'd thought was true had been revealed as lies built on stolen foundations. Emma, there's something Daddy needs to tell you. And then, we're going to be a family. A real one. The way we should have been all along. Emma looked between them, her father who'd been kept in darkness, her mother who'd been erased from existence, and her small hands formed a single sign that carried the weight of 5 years' worth of unconscious longing finally finding its home. Finally. 6 months later, the world looked different. Victoria sat in a federal prison awaiting trial for child trafficking, fraud, conspiracy, and a list of charges that grew longer every time investigators dug deeper into the Ashford family's use of wealth and influence. Senator Ashford had resigned in disgrace, his political empire crumbling under the weight of his daughter's crimes and his own willingness to look the other way when power was at stake. Maya, Adrian, and Emma didn't live in the Castillon estate. Adrian had walked away from most of his inheritance, keeping only enough to ensure Emma's future and Maya's security. They bought a renovated brownstone 3 blocks from the Café, close enough that Maya could still bake before dawn, far enough that they could build something new, something not haunted by ghosts of obligation and expectation. Emma's vocabulary expanded daily. She attended a school for deaf and hearing children, learning to exist in both worlds, her therapy sessions helping her process the trauma of her early years with a resilience that left her parents in awe. She called Maya Mommy now, the sign becoming as natural as breathing. She still called Victoria's memory nothing at all, some absences were blessings. The Café opened at 6, but Maya arrived at 5:30, the way she always had. This morning, Adrian was already there, having learned to make coffee that didn't taste like regret. He looked up when she entered, and the smile that crossed his face was different from the one he'd worn 5 years ago, harder earned, weighted with understanding, but real in a way that polished perfection could never be. I know I can never give you back those 5 years. But I promise you. Maya crossed to him, pressing her fingers gently against his lips, stopping the words before they could form into one more promise she didn't need. You don't have to promise me anything. We're here now. That's what matters. The door burst open, and Emma ran in with a kind of boundless energy only 5-year-olds possessed, her hands signing with frantic excitement. "Mommy! Daddy! I made you breakfast." She held up a plate of burnt toast, the edges black, the butter applied with the generous hand of someone who believed more was always better. It was objectively terrible. It was absolutely perfect. Maya pulled Emma into her arms, breathing in the scent of her daughter, strawberry shampoo and crayons and the particular sweetness of childhood, and felt 5 years of grief finally transform into gratitude. Some loves weren't meant to stay buried. Some secrets refused to stay silent. And sometimes, just sometimes, the hands of a little girl could rewrite an entire future, could take a story of theft and loss and transform it into a story of family found, of justice served, of love that refused to die even when the entire world conspired to kill it. The three of them sat at the cafe counter as morning light filled the space, eating burnt toast and drinking too strong coffee, and laughing in the way that only people who'd survived the unsurvivable could laugh, with the knowledge that they'd been broken and had chosen to heal anyway, that they'd lost years they could never reclaim but had found each other in the wreckage. That some families were born and others were stolen, and the very best ones were fought for with everything you had left. Would you have forgiven Adrian after everything? Or are some betrayals, even unintentional ones, too deep to heal? Let me know in the comments. And if this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to believe in second chances.